you haven't changed the way we measure intelligence.
No.
You've changed the way you found a better way to accommodate the existing measure of intelligence. Any plans to rip up the way we measure intelligence?
No, I think everyone knows that the problem we've got with the way education works is because it's got that paradigm. I mean, if you look at education, what were we really doing in Britain for the last couple of hundred years? We were using education to create diplomats, soldiers, and clerics. That's what it did, and so the way that it was all designed, the whole thinking around it, as you said, what's intelligence got to do with it? I think as we change and flip the classroom, the thing that teachers, as I said, teachers are really good at working with the individual. If we were to do I love rugby, by the way. If we were to do a download module on how to play rugby, the way I was taught at school was we'd throw a ball around and someone said you can't throw it forwards, you've got to throw it backwards. And bit by bit they'd correct us into being able to play. Nobody ever told me as a back row player what the line I should run off the back of a scrum defensively. I figured it out because if I ran in a certain line, they'd score. So you have to figure things out through mistakes. Wouldn't it have been a lot easier to tell me how to play rugby, and then every game and every practice would have been a rehearsal into certainty, getting better at it? And the coach's role changes from teaching, where you're reliant on whether the coach actually knows something, to supporting you in your application of that knowledge. So the role of the teacher, I think, needs to change. And I think teachers have always been about the student. But the pressures that we're coming under to get information into people's heads, to skill them up, has skewed it the wrong way. So teachers no longer look at the student. We've got these crazy circumstances now where you've got special education needs for kids who are dyslexic, on the one hand. There's a whole argument over whether that's a real thing or whether it's just kids who think different. And the kids who outperform. Everything's about standardising. It's about not being exceptional. So we put the smart kids who excel at education into special educational needs. This is nuts. Aren't we all exceptional? I'll give you a very... when I was a kid, my parents got called into school one day because they were concerned about me. And they said, we're really worried about Simon because of what he's drawn. And it wasn't anything rude or anything. And my parents looked at this picture and they went, yeah, that's Simon's drawing. If anyone's got any kids, you can tell your kids' drawings. They've got this unique way of doing it, and you can spot in a that's my kids. In fact, I've got... So the teacher said, well, these are all the other kids' drawings, and if you can see these, I mean, this is how other kids draw faces, yeah? Sort of round face, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, yeah? And they looked at mine and they went, oh, yeah. Because the way I draw faces is that's the nose, there's the mouth, the chin, the hair, there's the ear, in profile. And they said, we're really worried about Simon because he's either mentally deficient or he just looks at the world different. We don't think he's mentally deficient. I stopped drawing at that age. I think I've got ADD, which is artistic drawing deficit. I stopped drawing at that point. If they should have shown me Picasso or hieroglyphics. And so this is what we're doing to kids. So to your intelligence, yeah, we don't teach intelligence. We inhibit it. We teach them into this is what we think you should look like. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Simon. I've got a question. Anybody else got a question that builds up?
I've got one about the kind of whole diversity. So you mentioned that generally you hire people who are sort of similar to you, who you identify with.
I don't anymore.
I know, but so you don't. You've done the thinking. You had the aha moment, but many people haven't. So do you think maybe encouraging people to sort of see beyond, physical, and kind of identify with somebody as a person? So for example, we all have similar fears, we all have similar guilt, or you mentioned somebody asked you a question and you didn't answer it the best, and then you were kind of beating yourself up, essentially. Oh, I didn't answer it the best I could. I think everybody kind of goes through that. So could we somehow encourage people to start identifying with each other on that level? On the level of we all experience similar emotions.
So I think the first thing you need to do is understand what. First thing most people. I mean, we interviewed 16 CEOs at the moment. 2 of them didn't even know what unconscious bias was. Now, these are people that in their career have been really good in supporting women. They had never heard of unconscious bias. And actually, increasingly, what you find is just people don't know it. So the first thing you need to do is understand what it is and the impact it has on you. I mean, the good news, and it's basically, for those that don't know it as well, fundamentally society is what drives unconscious bias. So it tends to be 2 things. It tends to be how you were brought up. So if you were brought up with your mother working from home, having given her her career, it's more likely you're going to have an association between women and family than you are men and career. Yeah, it's the same thing in terms of, I don't have kids. You know, my wife is very successful at what she does, so it's easier for me to not have that unconscious bias. And in fact, I'd say is, I mean, it's hard to change your unconscious bias, but I have changed mine over the last 2 years. I think the first thing is to really understand that unconscious bias, and it takes a long time to and recognise it takes a long time to change it. So what you have to do is you have to start putting processes in place that get rid of those unconscious biases. So I think the first time without knowing what it was called, the first time I think my eye-opener was, I ran a Hyper Island course where I was running 2 agencies for 2 weeks. So the students had to create 2 agencies. And so what we did is we got the students to interview for MDs. And we did 18 interviews in 1 day. I think there were 12 minutes each. So we had to make it, in 12 minutes, we had to put a shortlist of MDs. My shortlist, all 5 were men. Yeah, but the thing that I did is I brought the people director up, and she had a completely different list. And that was the first time I'd really, that kind of short space of time. And she just argued, she said, listen, Lauren's fantastic. I really think you should give her a chance, because her skill set wasn't a skill set that I identified with. But she said, but these are the reasons why I think she'll be a great leader. So I listened to my people director, because there's a reason I brought her up. And guess what? We hired Lauren, we hired John, and Lauren kicked it out the park. She was the most successful person. In that particular case, I brought someone else in to allow them to see what I can't see. I'm going to tweet it. Go to Token Man. There's a beautiful, beautiful ad that's just been done in Denmark, and it's about how we see things. And what they've done is, I won't give it away. Actually, have a look at it. It's one of the best things I've seen in 12 months. It is fantastic. And what they're trying to show is the prejudices that we put on people, on groups of people. And it just, in a beautiful way, it shows how, with a very simple mechanic, it shows how, while people look very different, they're very much the same. Yes, have a look at it. I'll tweet it out straight after this. So go to the Token Man Twitter feed.
So self-awareness is kind of the first step.
Yeah.
Go on. For me, there's always a tension between this idea of, recognising your flaws, your unconscious biases, and then being the same. The standardising. How does that work? I mean, our biases are also what make us unique and weird and see the world differently.
Our bias is what makes us human.
Yes.
Fundamentally.
And if we strip that out, there's nothing left. There's
No, I'm not sure that's completely true. I think our biases are just, what makes us human is our background. So all you'll see, so one of the things on the Great British Diversity Experiment we talk about a lot is tribes. This idea of who do you hang out with? Yeah, I'm a creative person. I've spent too long hanging out with people the same as me. The minute you start hanging out with different people, you start getting a different viewpoint and you become better at being creative. Yeah. So I think when you're talking about your biases, the biases come from the fact that you don't have that cultural reference. And so for me, the more different tribes you can find, the different types of people, your biases will change as a result of that.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying, I want to bring my weirdnesses to those different tribes, and it's in that.
I don't think weirdness is a bias, though. I think the fact is, you're different, and I think that difference is is actually what makes creativity. And the more time you spend with different people, the more accommodating you're going to be of those differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, we had, you know, at the last agency I was in, the only reason I got hired is because, you know, we had this thing called Curious Mutants. You know, we only hired Curious Mutants. Every single person that got hired was just a bit different, which most ad agencies would not hire. I mean, it really was. We knew that no one else would hire us. And you know what? We went from a 70-person non-creative agency to 280 people and the second most awarded agency in the UK in 18 months. You know, so it can work. It fell apart because of politics and we were run by the agenda change. But you know, it does work, and so that idea, and I think that's why, you know, I love the advertising. I love advertising. I think when it does the right job, it's a brilliant medium. But I think the industry is really broken at the moment for that reason, so it doesn't pull in those different people.
Mm.
Can I ask a question that is really to you, Rob, and to you, Simon? Is how and when are we going to get coding, artificial intelligence, coding into the curriculum, into schools? Because I have this theory, really, that because education tries to create everybody the same, because that's an easy way to control a classroom, and it's the only way you can control it. You know, everyone has to take the exam on the same day and the same. You know, everything has to be the same. And you know, we now know, and we can be proud of the fact that we're all very different and very unique, and we learn in very different ways at different speeds. So how can we possibly be taught the same way? So clearly, AI is going to support that somehow.
Absolutely, and I think there are steps being taken to get coding into education. I mean, things like Raspberry Pi and the $5 computer that are making computing and coding suddenly very accessible is one element. And I just think the rise of AI will change that massively. I mean, ultimately it comes down to government to make those changes. And their grasp on technology is somewhat lacking from what I've seen so far. So I think we may have to wait a few years before we see any real change.
Because I went to a conference that was actually hosted at the London School of Arts, and it was with a whole load of university lecturers and school teachers and whatnot. And the fear was we're being replaced. Not how are we going to do this to make it better for our students, because the student benefit is learning. And that really frightened me, because I come from a branding consultancy. You know, Honey's about creating benefit and commercial effectiveness for all brands, and it seemed, I was like, you're missing the point, guys. It's actually going to enable, in my mind, AI is going to enable you to be a teacher, as in take care on a human level, because we can't replicate human gut instinct and empathy, because it will automate all the stuff we don't like doing, the admin, the cross-channeling, you know, the ability to be able to learn. I can read the syllabus 5 times, but somebody else, my neighbour, wants to read it once really well and diligently.
Absolutely, and I think AI, I mean, there's no doubt that technology is going to have a huge impact on jobs over the coming years, and my view is that it won't take jobs as such, it will change them. So the roles will change. Within your role, a robot or an AI will be able to do the menial tasks, leaving you the opportunity to deal with the more creative elements of your job. So I see humans and robots or artificial intelligence working side by side rather than robots taking all of our jobs, which is what the media like to spout.
So Kevin Kelly at South by last year said, I'd much rather have an economy built on creativity than one built on routine. And I think that's fundamental. What he's talking about on AI is we're about to enter an age of creativity. And that has quite significant implications for us as individuals, because we have to, the most creative people will be the ones that really thrive.
But what we have to be really careful of are probably the people that are writing the briefs for the coders.
I guess so, but that will change. The current people who are writing are not the people who are going to write in the future. I think anybody who's creative will be writing code. So I think that will change.
Well, I think yes, coding is important, and so is music, and so is darts. You know, we talk about how important sport is at school, but we only teach certain sports. And one of the reasons, you know, going to Brailsford and the Olympic, they started looking at athletes and going, actually, are you in the right sport? And they took some athletes and they said, you're in the wrong sport. Your physiology is better suited to rowing. I think was it Catherine Granger who was shifted into rowing from a different sport. And schools are limited by what the teacher knows. So, yes, we can do coding, but is that the coding that the student wants? And is it at the right time because that teacher is only available for that hour? And one of the other things that we're looking at is circadian rhythms. So the research that's been done at Oxford, and Paul's one of the people leading that, Paul Kelly, who developed Space Learning, who's on our board, looking at our bodily rhythms. So in the same way as in the morning, your appetite is different from in the evening. Some people are more night owls, or our bodies and our brains learn better and are more efficient at different day parts. All of us are different, and it changes through our lives. If you can identify that day part when you're most efficient, you can gear your work life or your learning life to that day part. And the same, you know, why are we teaching, you know, we education is still like a factory, isn't it? You're batched up in year groups and passed through in this weird way, as if a kid who's born at the beginning of the, you know, there's a year between the youngest and oldest in a year, and we think that they're going to learn at the same rate, you know. And I've got, you know, my kids absolutely obsessed with mythology. Other kids aren't, but they might be obsessed with it in 6 years' time, and yet we're teaching history and maths and everything in this uniform way, rather than saying, you want to learn coding? Go and find out about it. And they might become fascinated by this bloke called Turing and go into history. But somebody else will be fascinated by something else and go in a different direction. So to the answer of how we need to totally reinvent how we think, because we know, humanity knows stuff. It's about how do we communicate that to the people who want or need to know that stuff at the right time.
Absolutely. We've got another question from the audience.
Do you think there's a potential problem with regards to gender inequality with AI?
Well, I mean, listen, when you look at unconscious bias, the answer is probably yes, in that if we look at the amount of people that are coding, I'm guessing that they're predominantly men. So the AI and the way the nuances and the way it answers will probably be in the short term geared to being far more relevant to men. I mean, we've seen it in a lot of things. So the answer is yes. I mean, you know, it'd be really interesting to know what the program teams Alexa. But I know people like, I know if you look at Silicon Valley, they understand the gender diversity issue, and they're trying to do a lot of work. And if you look at the organisations that you know, Facebook now has put all of their unconscious bias training online. All their, you know, they are working really, really hard to try and fix that and mix it. So it'll come down to who's doing the programming.
I'd agree with that to a point. The only thing I would say is that AI will continue to learn as it evolves, so it will learn from its users. So as more and more women are using it, it should learn from their biases. So it should, over time,
become an echo chamber, though.
Well,
reconfirming existing biases.
I guess that depends how good a job you're doing.
Hello, I've got a very quick question, Simon. I was interested in your download process, and will that work, or is it something that can be applied for kind of informal learning? So I'm thinking about work that the BBC do around sort of documentaries and stuff that people just sort of consume casually, and other websites that are trying to convey information, all the way to marketing that are trying to convey something that might be loosely termed learning in an informal way.
Yes. So the process still works. So the way that we run it, and this is very much towards a commercial and an educational audience as opposed to the casual, but assuming someone wants to learn something, and more importantly in a business context, in a corporate context, turn it into a behaviour, is the first input we have what we call the cognitive input, which is the theoretical. So if we took health and safety as an example, whether you're an astronaut or a nursery school teacher, how you fill out a risk assessment form is the same. How you assess risk is the same. The distraction activity, which stops the synapses firing and inhibiting the chemical processes, blah, 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 you need to do something else. It could be juggling, it could be meditating. And in terms of BBC, for example, that's difficult to control because of the way that we consume entertainment. The second input we have active recall, so a Q&A where the student tries to actively recall the answers. So it's the same information presented in a slightly different way. So rather than saying this is how you fill out you assess a risk, how do you assess a risk? And the student fills in the gap and then is given the answer to reinforce and fill in the gaps. What you also can put in there is attitudinal questions. So advertising world, we were always cutting corners, or I was always cutting corners, and it was always next time we'll do it properly. And this time is always last time's next time. So how do you break that cycle? So if your boss says X, how do you answer? So you get to people to start thinking about those attitudinal things and those barriers to adoption of an implementation of knowledge. And then the third input that we have, the third repetition, is with case studies. You turn, and this is where it becomes very specific. So everything up to that point is the same for a nursery school teacher and an astronaut, but the implementation, the case study, is going to be totally different. The case studies bring that to life. So you can use it in informal learning. And this is not a sort of rocket science in terms of fighting nature. This is like gravity. This is working with the way our brains already work. And so people are probably familiar with these patterns. It seems to make sense, but what we've done is actually find the codes that make it optimize it and make it as efficient as possible. Yeah.
James, you need, for the video live feed, thanks.
Hello. Really inspiring talks, thank you, all three of you. I'm doing some work on a chatbot at the moment. I've got some coders doing some other work for me. And when I look at what they're doing on the screen, I mean, it's like it's in Russian or something. It's, some completely different language. So my simple question is, do you have one of your download things on coding at the moment? Because I think I'd quite like to learn it.
Not yet.
That's the first disappointing thing you said all day.
I know. Okay, so I mean, this comes into the business model side of things. And we looked at going into education. The problem is the people who have the budgets and the people who do the work are the same people in schools. And there is that fear that we're going to put ourselves out of a job. They're not. It's just that their role will change, and actually for the better. But it's difficult to break into that. Whereas in the corporate sector, they've got the budgets. They've got a big constituency, so the scale that we need. And they tend to have the learning materials. So we don't see ourselves as a training company, we're a publishing platform. So with the police, they already know Stop and Search, they've got those materials, we're translating it. So it's almost like vanity publishing, should we say. So a lot of the corporates that we're working with are doing that. The other side of it is working with thought leaders. So people like Matthew Syed, Black Box Thinking. So his issue is how do you scale up his unique thinking and his research and insight? So we're going to take his work and put it on, and then we can publish it to a wider community. Apprenticeships are going to be a huge opportunity for us, but also sort of a huge issue. How do you scale up and improve quality and consistency? So that if someone has that material, because I can't create it, I don't know this stuff. If someone has that material and gives it to us, and someone's got a bit of budget to throw at it, we'd love to do a joint venture and we can publish that, because I think there is a demand for people to learn how to code.
I mean, there's a huge, online courses are huge nowadays. Obviously, MOOCs are huge. So there's an opportunity for you to work with various MOOC publishers to take what they've got and, is it download it? Is that the term you'd use?
Yeah.
Do your thing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we are at startup stage, so we're young and we've got no money, which means there are lots of things our challenge is with education, you could go anywhere, couldn't you? Whether it's there's so much stuff people want to learn, so everyone goes, what about dyslexics and other, what about this and that? And yes, and as we grow and scale, we'll be able to go into different sectors, into different areas. So the challenge is to keep focused so we don't dissipate. And that's just a commercial reality. You know. And this is the biggest challenge for me personally, is moving from a wicked world into a tame one. Using that language from earlier. So we're going from this wicked world of thinking, and yes, there's all possibility and opportunity, into a tame one, which is becoming a production line and a process.
Repeatable and scalable.
Sorry?
Something that's repeatable and scalable. Yeah, I get it. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Another question really was aimed at Rob. What's the future of retail? How will this look for the next generation? Really, this is in the context of AI.
Absolutely. So I think retail has undergone enormous change over the last 15 years with the advent of e-commerce, mobile, and I just see that trend continuing, but moving into voice commerce, voice activation, where you'll be able to buy things by just chatting to your Amazon Echo, asking to order things. You've already seen Amazon Dash buttons, where you've got a button next to your washing machine that you can order more washing powder or nappies or whatever that might be. And I also see technologies such as virtual reality fundamentally changing the retail environment. So you'll be able to sit at home, put your virtual reality headset on and walk around a virtual store, buy things, and the next day they're delivered to you. So there's all of those kinds of technologies. I mean, lots of it, and everything in retail seems to end up back at Amazon at the moment. So over 50% of retail searches are on Amazon. Most retailers have a store of some kind on Amazon now. You've got Amazon Echo, Amazon Dash, Amazon delivers it, and Amazon are now they're trialing their stores in the US now, where you can walk in and just walk out with product without Amazon Go, without having to go to a cashier. So I think the future of retail is really exciting, and it's going to change. It will be unrecognisable in 10 or 15 years' time to
Because
what we see today.
Disruption in retail is the old business model, sadly, from a lease point of view. The retail, I'm talking about at face down in the retail shops, you know, the cost of the lease versus the amount of foot traffic that comes into the store versus online purchasing. You know, obviously you can see a shift of change that's happening, which is called experiential. I mean, you know, those of us in the creative world have been doing experiential for years. It's just we didn't call it experiential. You know, there was customer flow, understanding the journey, all this kind of thing. So shops are kind of becoming galleries, if you like. They're changing their mindset to be the showroom, exactly. And I think the car industry was perhaps the first to really understand this years ago when they did a study at FMCG. But so if that's happening, what's happening? There's a piece in your publication about, therefore, the disruption in finance, because they've got to disrupt the finance models, or you know, the retail. We won't. You know, I go shopping with my kids at the weekend not to buy anything. I go shopping just to talk to them about things that are happening, to invigorate their brain. You know, take them through John Lewis, and you know they love the lifts. I mean, they're 4 and 5 for the audience. Sorry, they're not retards. 4 and 5. And so, you know, for me, shopping it educates them in a very different way. And of course, the retailer's not going to like me because I'm not walking out with a bag loads, because I'll probably go home and buy it online. Now, that's the simple fact that's happening. So how do you, why, you know, is finance changing? You know, is it changing fast enough?
I think the simple fact is that retail will continue to evolve and change. Like you say, we're seeing showrooming, and I think you'll see more and more partnerships with retailers and banks, for example. So you'll go into one store and there will be stores within stores, and maybe not necessarily offering product. So it might be that it will be a service at a coffee shop or a museum. And I think that the lines between what is retail and what isn't will become totally blurred, and you'll be buying and consuming wherever you are, whether that's at the train station, whether it's sitting in your car, whether it's sitting at home. I think our idea of what a retail destination is now will change fundamentally.
And I think there's another piece about disruption of risk assessment before you invest. So due diligence for financiers. Can you share a bit of insight there?
I know very little about that sector, to be honest. I think, in all likelihood, the things that is going to change that is artificial intelligence, being able to look at vast quantities of data and make the right decisions very quickly will change RegTech massively and compliance. But to be honest, my expertise are not in that area, so I couldn't comment too much. So.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay, well, I think unless you've got anything else to add, guys.
I'm really interested in my own experience of watching the women in the playground, and I'm in my own little bubble. We've got this extraordinary talent resource that is just sitting there, being treated as mums, and it's being a mother and being a horrible term, a caregiver or whatever it is, doing the parenting is fabulous. But there's so much talent there that's not being utilised. Is there anything that's happening at the moment that's going to tap into that talent?
Yeah, so Ali Hannon runs something called Creative Equals in the advertising industry, and she has just launched something which is called Returnships. So she's launched a program specifically to get mums back into the workforce. If you look at something like Digital Mums has done some fantastic work in terms of finding ways for mums to be able to do the part-time. I think, and I was on one of their panels the other day, and I think the key thing that needs to change is flexible working. So we need to start, rather than looking at parents, I'm not a parent, so I'll be honest, Creative Social was my baby. Yeah, and when, I was actually quite annoyed when a parent would go, I'm going to pick my child up. There was no one would, that would be fine. In some cases, I'd go, I'm going to run an event, and it'd be like, oh, what are you doing? So I think we've got to start looking at flexible working. So there's a brilliant agency I work with. They are now, they've tested it for one group, and anyone they hire for a job, they are then giving them an offer letter that offers a 5-day-a-week contract, a 4-day-a-week contract, and a 3-day-a-week contract, which I think is fucking brilliant. Just because it just all of a sudden gives everyone options. So I think there is your answer is that there's some things happening, but I think the thing that needs to change and will change significantly is if organisations start doing flexible working, and this is really important not just for parents, it's also important for the new generation coming through, because the new generation have worked out that this world of working your arse off for 30 years, 40 years to then have some money that you can retire with, and then that's when you can have your fun, when you're actually probably not the most mobile in your life, isn't the life they want to lead. Yeah, and so they've started to recognise that when you look at wealth, money is just one part of how you define wealth.
I just want to make a request. If you're disrupting things, could you disrupt childcare, please? Because actually one of the biggest inhibitors as a working parent going back to work was finding a job while I was on maternity leave and being able to go to job interviews where I was having to then pay for childcare in order to be interviewed for a job I may not get. And that's a huge disincentive. So just having the time and the capacity to find work.
So I have 2 employees, one works 2 days a week. Everyone told me I'm mad letting someone work 2 days a week. She's done a brilliant job, and I said, come back, we'll try it. But, she's great, I'd like her to move 3 days a week. And she said, it will cost me money to go from 2 days to 3 days.
I'm currently paying to go to work.
Yeah, which is absolutely ludicrous.
And it's not just the time; it's the mental logistics of balancing all of these different things. There's something.
Society we're not set up. There's a whole sort of other stuff. So the workplace needs to change absolutely, but then all the things around it need to change as well.
Yeah.
Oh. Where's the mic? Anyone? Does anyone know where the mic is?
James, I think we're coming from one angle, right? So we are focusing.
Sorry,
on,
Daniela, can you repeat the question? Because
So James said, what's wrong with working after kids? We're assuming, so his point is we're assuming that the reality is what we're looking at is equality. Yeah, so the equality to make those decisions. We currently live in a society where there isn't equality. So because of biases, because of the way it's set up, it is, at the moment, it's kind of assumed that the mother takes that role and that responsibility. And so therefore, you can make that choice, but there's a lot of women that actually that choice is forced, it's forced on them. Yeah, they have no choice but to not go back to work, and it's really hard to go back. On the other side, there's a lot of men that actually do want to look after kids, but because some of the challenges that they face as a result of doing that, although they're higher earning, etc., they also don't have that choice. So what we're talking about is choices. All we're talking about is people having equal choices. And once they have equal choices, they can make that choice. At the moment, at the moment that choice isn't equal.
Well, and it's not just the women. I mean, I'm the primary care giver, as it were. So I have to do the morning and get the boys. I've got 2 boys and do the evening meal and the homework and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm top and tailing the day. And for many people, depending on their career choice, if you're a lawyer, you can't do your job because of the infrastructure that is around that job. So you are pushed out of the workplace. The fact that I just do weird stuff means that I can fit it in between and do it whenever I want to. So I'm unusual in many ways in that instance. But there are so many women who are at the gates. You know, we've got the choice is either the husband has to stay at home and do the care, and there's a whole issue around that actually, around what does it mean to be a man at the school gates, and it can be incredibly lonely because when I started out, it was kind of weird. People wouldn't talk to you because, especially because is he predatory? And until they found out that I was married and they'd met my wife, and they went, oh, it's okay, he's not some sort of guy. There's a whole weird politics in the playground. So in terms of unconscious bias, it's a weird place, playgrounds. If you haven't been in one, those who have are just going, yeah. So there's a whole load of stuff going around that as well, and it's just hugely challenging just to work with kids.
It is. Well, thank you, Daniele. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Simon, for your time this morning. And thank you all for coming to Rip It Up, Start Again. See you next time. Cheers.